Hello everyone, my name is Ian and you're watching Big Rock Moto. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and if you're new here, I hope you'll consider subscribing if you appreciate this kind of content. Let's rewind just 2 years ago to 2020. BMW punched out the engine in their F850 GS adventure bike. They punched it out to almost 900cc, and they introduced two new street bike models, the F900R and the F900XR. These new bikes are designed to compete with the ever-growing segment of sort of middleweight or upper middleweight naked motorcycles, like the very successful Yamaha MT-09 and more touring-oriented Tracer 900. So the question is, did the Germans make a naked bike that can really go head-to-head with the best that Japan has to offer? That's what we're here today to find out. Apparently we have an interested visitor. What do you think of the F900R, sweetheart? What do you think of the F900?
I don't know.
You don't know? You're in your lion suit. Why is that? Why are you in the lion suit?
This is what's this is there.
Alright, so here's how we're going to structure the review today. First, we're going to talk about the model specs and pricing of the F900R. Then I'm going to show you the seating position and the seat height of the bike. Then we're going to take a tour around the bike, talk about the specs, show you the features of the bike, show you how everything works. Then, of course, we're going to get it out on the road for a full test, twisties, highway, urban riding, acceleration of braking, and all that sort of stuff. Then we're going to come back here, we're going to talk about the competition, talk about the pros and cons, and we'll end with some final thoughts. So with that, let's get on with the review. All right, so let's cover the model specs and pricing real quick. So BMW would be very fast to point out that the base price of this bike is very competitive and very low, at just coming in at just under $9,000 US. However, with most BMW models, and this is no different, the options really start to add up. And to be honest, you probably want all these options. So my Tester comes in at around $12,000, and the reason for that is it has the $2,500 premium package, which gives you a lot of things, and maybe I'll put a list here, the adaptive headlight, the heated grips, the quick shifter, ABS Pro, more riding modes. It's a long list of extra equipment that gives you, and it'd be pretty hard to imagine this bike without all that stuff. Wouldn't quite be as much of a BMW in my opinion. I think that's maybe why you get a BMW. You want some of the more of those premium features. My bike also has a $300 sport style package, which makes it look cool, which is probably worth the $300. So all in all, when you add destination and everything like that, this bike comes in around $12,500 plus tax and fees, of course, that you're going to have to pay at your dealership. Let's check out the seat height and the riding position on the F900R. So the seat height with the standard seat is 32 inches or 812 millimeters. Keep in mind, BMW will sell you taller seats and lower seats, and they also offer, as BMW typically does, which is a great thing that they do, is they offer a low suspension option, which actually drops the suspension down to make the bike an even lower seat height. So let me take the bike off the center stand and kind of show you the seat height and how I sit on it. So I am 5'10", about 70 inches tall, or about 178 centimeters tall. I have a 32-inch leg inseam. I weigh 200 pounds or 90 kilograms. And you can see it's very easy for me to flat foot the bike on both sides. The bike feels very low to the ground, very secure. It also doesn't feel very top heavy, although it is a little heavier than its competitors, which is something that we're going to talk about through this whole review. Now, the riding position, in order to do that, let me pop the bike back on the center stand, which is really easy to do. So you can see here, the riding position is pretty sporty, pretty aggressive. My knee band is pretty aggressive, the pegs are pretty high, and I am leaned forward quite a bit. It's not like a sport bike, but it is, you know, pretty aggressive position. I'm actually fairly comfortable in this kind of position, but it just depends on your personal preference whether or not this is going to work for you. All right, let's take a walk around, talk about the specs and features of the F900R. Let's start with the engine. It's a liquid-cooled parallel twin, 270-degree firing order, 4 valves a cylinder. It displaces 895 cc. It has a 13.1 compression ratio, meaning you really should use premium or 91 octane gas. For power and torque, you're looking at 105 horsepower or 78 kilowatts at 8,500 RPM. Torque is 68 foot-pounds or 92 newton meters at 6,500 RPM. And of course, that's hooked up to a 6-speed transmission into a chain final drive. And this bike does have the optional quick shifter. Front suspension is a non-adjustable upside down fork. It has 5.3 inches or 134 millimeters of travel. Again, no adjustments there on the front fork. The rear shock is a monoshock. This bike has dynamic ESA. It's 5.5 inches of travel or about 139 millimeters of travel. And it is adjustable through the electronic suspension settings, which I'll show during the ride portion of this review. Let's look at the brakes on this bike. So you've got Brembo brakes, radially mounted, 4-piston calipers on each side, squeezing 320 millimeter discs. So pretty powerful brakes, as you would expect from BMW, especially on a sporty bike like this. For the back brake, you have a 265 millimeter disc with a single piston caliper. Tires and wheels, so you're looking at 17-inch wheels like you would expect on a bike like this. It's a 180 width rear tire and a 120 width front tire. We've talked about the seat height already. That's 32 inches. And of course you have the low and high seat options available. We already talked about that. One thing we may not have covered yet is the fuel tank. So the fuel tank is 3.4 gallons or 13 liters. And that gives you a range of around 150 miles. I find I get around 50 miles a gallon with this bike. So actually the range is a little bit better than you might expect, but it depends on how fast you ride and how aggressive you accelerate. Now I've seen some misprints in some of the magazines and reviews of this bike saying that it has a 15 or 16 liter tank. That's the F900XR. The R has a smaller tank than the XR model. So that's something you need to keep in mind. Now let's talk about the weight. So that is a little bit of an issue with this bike. This bike is a little bit heavier than some of its competitors. So it's 465 pounds fully fueled up, or about 211 kilograms. All right, so what about maintenance on the F900R? So oil changes, they want you to do that every 6,000 miles or 10,000 kilometers. And the oil change is going to be pretty easy because you've got, automotive type filters, and you've got, drain plugs. The oil change is not hard to do on bike like this. So here you can see the oil filter right down here, kind of by the exhaust, by the rear brake lever. Now, major services on this bike are going to be every 20,000 kilometers or 12,000 miles. That's going to be valve inspection, spark plugs, air filter, and stuff like that. Most people are going to have that done at a dealership or a workshop. However, if you're well initiated, you could do that yourself. Now you do have a chain final drive, so you're going to have to do some maintenance on that. Now BMW says that this has their M endurance chain, which they've touted as being less maintenance or longer lasting. However, I've seen some independent tests about that, and it seems like that's not really necessarily the case, and it might just be a normal chain. So there you go, buyer beware on that sort of marketing claim. All right, now time for the tour. Let's start at the front of the bike. You've got this kind of stack design LED headlight. This is an adaptive headlight, which is part of the premium package, which this bike has. You can see kind of this cool R graphic inside the headlight. I think it looks pretty cool. No fairing, no windshield at all, so you can actually see the dashboard kind of sticking out here. Front fender, kind of gold inverted forks, LED turn signals. We've got the fairings here, adjustable levers. We'll talk about the controls here in a minute. Coming around, you can see the side fairings, the lower engine spoiler, the exhaust coming around down here, oil filter, talked about that. You can see the rear suspension with the ESA, foot pegs, passenger and driver foot pegs here. The exhaust, pretty slim, pretty nice looking little exhaust actually, and it has this kind of interesting dual outlet, I guess, to signify the 2 cylinders. We talked about the rear brake, rear tire, stuff like that. You can see the rear mudguard and license plate holder, LED rear turn signals, passenger grab handles here. These are mounts for the luggage that BMW offers, and that comes on the premium package that this bike is equipped with. Moving around to this side of the bike, you can see some of the componentry for the dynamic ESA suspension. You can see the quick shifter module here. Center stand. The center stand is an option, and this bike does have that. It's definitely something I recommend when you have a chain. It's nice to do your chain maintenance with the center stand so you can get that rear wheel off the ground. Looking under here, you can kind of see the radiator, some of the frame, and the engine down inside there. All right, let's cover the controls and look at the electronics and TFT on the F900R. So typical BMW, high quality, very well made, easy and intuitive to use. You've got the Wonder Wheel here. You've got cruise control, hazard lights, suspension chain. You can change your suspension settings here. One click to change the damping, hold it down to change the preload. turn signals, horn, menu up and down. Show you how all that works in a second. Flash to pass button there for your high beams. You can see that. Over here, you've got stop start mode, switches between your riding modes. This bike has the optional extra riding modes with it. Heated grip switch. I love having the heated grips as a manual control instead of having to go into the menu. Now, this bike does have the navigation. This is the older Nav 5. You know, they're kind of phasing these out, and they don't really want to talk about these, so they're using more of those smartphones and things these days. So we're not going to go into that because that's kind of outdated. You can see adjustable levers here for your clutch and brake levers, typical BMW mirrors. Everything feels very good, high quality. Now, the TFT dash, let's cover this. So it's BMW's typical highly legible, high contrast, large TFT, one of the best in the business. So how this works is, so if you see here my left thumb, if I hit the up menu button, that changes the readout here at the top of the screen. So trip computers, tire pressure, range, fuel. I just fueled this bike up on the way home, odometer, stuff like that. Now if you hit the bottom menu button, you can go in here, and from here you can go in and see your vehicle readouts, your engine temperature, battery voltage, tire pressure. You've got your onboard trip computer. I've been getting, was reset when I went up the mountain, but I get around 50 miles a gallon typically on this bike. This bike has 1,800 miles on it, and of course it's a BMW, so it shows you, it kind of throws you in your face how many hours you've been drinking coffee. I guess I've been drinking coffee for 864 hours. Seems like a long time. I don't think that's quite accurate. Another trip computer. Then you've got a separate screen for your tire pressure, and then you've got a service screen here as well. Now, one more thing I want to show you, because I'm not doing this during the riding portion. Well, you've got navigation, you've got media, you can connect to your phone, and there's a good interface for that. However, we're not going to get into that in this video. Sport, so what is that? So this Sport is a different dashboard display. So if you select that by hitting the down menu button, then it brings up this dashboard layout here, which is the different tachometer. It shows you the percentage of your traction control intervention, how hard you're braking. Now, if you use the Wonder Wheel to swipe left or right, you can then change, and you have lap timers. So you've got this screen, and then you've got the screen with the lap timers. So kind of cool if you're gonna take this bike on a track or do some more aggressive riding and you want this kind of readout. I do like having the sport mode. It's a nice option to have there, making good use of that TFT. Speaking of the Wonder Wheel, I love BMW's Wonder Wheel. It allows you, especially when you're doing your phone or media or music or things like that, or navigation, it allows you here to select left and right and scroll through. It's a very good way to control things on a motorcycle handlebar. Of course, this bike has keyless ride, so on off there, and then to get gas, you just click this up, and there you go. You get your fuel, no key, and that is an optional extra on that this bike has. All right, I think that's about it for the tour and specs. Let's get to riding. All right, let's set off on the F900R and give you my very first impressions, what you notice when you first start riding it. Alright, so as you know, I'm very lucky to be able to test all sorts of motorcycles. So there's a few things that jump out at me about the F900R right away. The first one is a positive thing. I really like the way the engine sounds. It has a nice deep growl to it. It sounds very sporty. It sounds kind of different, and I really enjoy it. The next thing is the throttle is a little jumpy. It's a little snatchy or kind of on-off, just a little bit. It's not horrible, and it's better in the rain mode. I'm in the regular road mode now, but it's not too bad. The third thing is the steering feels pretty heavy. Like, it handles well, and it's very confidence inspiring. But, thank you, Mr. Caltrans. but the turn in, and it just feels heavy, like there's a lot of input required to get this thing to turn in. But once you turn in and take a good set, it actually handles really well. This bike is also geared pretty tall. I mean, second gear winds out to, I don't know, 60, 70 miles an hour. That's pretty normal for street bikes, I guess, but it's something I noticed. Also, the quick shifter, it's not the smoothest quick shifter I've ever used. It's a little bit notchy, a little bit kind of rough on the quick shifter. Maybe I just need to rev the bike higher for it to work better, I'm not sure. In terms of power, the engine feels powerful. Really good acceleration. What surprised me about this bike is that, you know, I've ridden the 850GS and the 850GS Adventure, and those bikes, they're a little heavier, and the engine in that bike is a smaller engine, although it's the same basic engine, it's just less displacement. And there's a big difference in acceleration and overall engine feel. I really can't help but thinking, why doesn't BMW put this engine in their adventure bike? That'd be really good. Because as it is, the 850GS feels a little sluggish to me, feels a little slow, and doesn't sound as good as this. I really enjoy this engine, so I don't see why they're doing that, keeping the older, smaller engine in the adventure bike. But this is a great little twin-cylinder engine, and I'm a huge fan of twin-cylinder engines. I really like them. Vibration, so above 6,000 RPM, you feel a little bit of buzz coming to the bike, but it's not intrusive. I don't think it would be an issue, really. And this is not a bike that you're really gonna, you know, go on a 5,000 mile, you know, across the country trip on. Yeah, even at redline, yeah, you feel a little buzz through the bars, but it's not bad. I think my overall first impression of the bike is it's pretty refined, relatively comfortable for a naked bike, and pretty sporty, pretty fun to ride. Maybe not as exhilarating as some of its competitors, but still very enjoyable. Suspension feels a little bumpy. It'd be nice to have some more adjustment in the suspension. You have a non-adjustable front fork, so that's kind of a bummer. I really like this engine. Really like it. Right, it's kind of windy and blustery out, so I hope the audio is okay. But there's a couple things I wanted to point out now that I'm kind of down off the mountain. One is heated grips. So the heated grips have 3 different levels, and I've been using them this entire ride, and I love heated grips. Such a nice thing to have. The other thing is cruise control. So for a naked bike like this, there's not too many of these that have cruise control. Really nice feature to have. So 60 miles per hour, and there you go. It says right on your dash what your cruise control is set at, and then up and down, really easy. Really nice thing to have on straight sections of road, or when you're trying to obey the speed limit, or for longer trips. Absolutely love having cruise control. Now, I forgot to mention the electronic suspension. So you have dynamic ESA, which is BMW's system. It varies the damping as you ride, and I have it set in road normally, but you can also change it to dynamic, which right there with the click of a button makes the damping firmer for riding on twisty roads. But on this bike, dynamic feels a little harsh to me, so I kind of tend to prefer to run it in the normal road damping setting. Now, if you want to adjust the preload, you have to stop the bike like this, hold this down, and you can change between. So it has electronic preload adjustment. So I've got rider plus luggage. I can feel the rear of the bike raising up quite a bit, actually. I can do 2 riders, or I can do, let's see, yeah, it's got 1 rider, 2 riders, or one rider and luggage. Those are the settings. And I can feel it going up and down pretty good as I'm sitting here. So let's go back to the normal setting. You have to be stopped to do this. There's a noticeable difference in that preload. Okay, let's get going again. Ride this bike around town a little bit, show you how it is in the urban setting. This bike's a little hooligan. Alright, let's see how this thing does in a more urban environment. A lot of people are going to ride it in situations like this, stop and go traffic. I haven't noticed any unusual engine heat or anything like that, but it is pretty cool. It's only 61 degrees Fahrenheit, so I'm probably not going to notice too much of that, but this engine doesn't seem to have too much problems with heat, even in the other bikes that share this engine. Let's see, turn the heated grips off, don't need those anymore. Riding modes, talked about that already. Rain, road, dynamic pro. I usually prefer the road. On BMWs, for the most part, the riding modes actually don't make the bike faster or slower. You still have access to the same amount of horsepower. It just changes how the throttle responds. So when I did my 850 GS review, people criticized me and said, oh, you didn't have the bike in dynamic mode, so you didn't feel the true acceleration. But that's false. That's absolutely false. It has the same acceleration in road mode. It just, the initial throttle response is more aggressive in the dynamic mode. But if you twist the throttle all the way, you have access to the same amount of power. A lot of people don't understand how riding modes work, and it's kind of a pet peeve of mine. So going over this broken pavement, kind of all these cracks in the road, really bad roads here in California. Yeah, it's pretty bumpy, honestly. It's not the smoothest thing, but then again, I'm used to adventure bikes with more suspension travel, so it's probably not a fair comparison. Yeah, you know, for getting around town, this is a great little machine to do this with. Pretty light, pretty nimble, pretty low, super easy to reach the ground, great brakes. Comfortable enough. Been riding for around an hour maybe, and I don't feel any seat discomfort yet, although the seat does feel pretty hard, so I don't think it'd be comfortable all day. Yeah, that quick shifter just, it's kind of rough. Alright, so in order to test the acceleration and the braking, we'll go ahead and do a 0 to 100 to 0, and that's in miles per hour. Of course, this is a closed course, don't try this at home, all those sorts of disclaimers like that. Okay, that's always fun. So, the acceleration is good. You know, above 80 miles an hour, it's not super fast. It's not a Hayabusa or something, but it's plenty of power. And then the brakes, I feel the brakes are strong. You know, some people said that in another test that they felt the brakes were soft, but I mean, these things feel like the bike's going to flip over with those front brakes. It feels plenty strong to me. And then the back brake feels good too. BMW brakes are usually some of the best out there. They use Brembo, so. Alright, wrapping up the on-road portion of the test of the F900R. I've really enjoyed my time with this bike over the last few weeks. It's really a great motorcycle. I really think it might be a little bit underrated or underappreciated by some people. It combines really like a good sense of sportiness and athleticism with the refinement and sort of comforts and creature comforts that you expect from BMW. Speaking of that, turn my heated grips back up to high because I'm back in the mountains and it's getting cold again. It's down into the 40s. So what are some final thoughts on riding this bike? The seat, I am noticing the seat is a little hard. I've been riding for a couple hours. It's starting to feel a little bit harder, but it's not bad. It's not the worst seat I've ever experienced. The throttle kind of on off, like right there. Yeah, that's kind of bugs me a little bit, but it's not terrible. Overall, I don't have any major complaints. I do wish the suspension had some more adjustment because although this has a dynamic ESA, that only works on the rear shock. It's not connected to the front forks at all, so those are just the way they are. Not bad, but it could be better. So hopefully we won't freeze to death here getting back home. Let's get back home and start to wrap up this review. All right, let's cover the competitors to this bike. We're not going to go in a crazy deep dive because this is not like a buyer's guide type video, but I will say that the F900R sits with some very, very tough, very, very good competition. So if we look strictly at sort of the engine size, engine power, and price range, really, you're looking at bikes like the Ducati Monster, the Yamaha MT-09, the Kawasaki Z900, the Triumph Street Triple, and of course KTM's 890 Duke. Now, unfortunately, the BMW is a little bit behind on the power compared to a lot of those competitors, and it's a little bit heavier in terms of weight. So overall, you know, the German option here is, yeah, a little bit heavier, a little less power, which affects that power to weight ratio, which makes it a little bit less thrilling to ride. When you're choosing a bike in this segment, there's a lot of things you're going to have to consider. One, which bikes do you like the styling on? Styling is a huge consideration when buying this kind of motorcycle. Sit on all the bikes, which one is most comfortable to you? Dealer networks. In the US where I live, BMW dealers are a very different and, in my opinion, a lot better experience than most of the Japanese dealerships. They have test rides, they have demo bikes, they have just a better overall buying and service experience in my personal experience than the Japanese brands do. So I'm more oriented towards the BMW than some of those other brands, but that could be different depending on what country you're in and how your local dealers are like. BMW also has really good programs for financing. They have special financing programs that let you get into these bikes for very low monthly payments, and they also have a very good warranty, one of the best in the business. In this segment, I would definitely say that the BMW and the Ducati Monster are probably the most refined, sort of most premium feeling among all the bikes that I've mentioned. I think a lot of journalists would agree that if you want the highest performance, sort of sharpest bike in this segment, it's probably gonna be that KTM 890 Duke. It's really, really hard to beat that bike for outright performance. I think ultimately when you're choosing a bike in this segment, you really have to, it's part emotion and part reason, right? There's pricing, there's all those things to consider, but also really it's supposed to be fun, it's supposed to be emotional, something you connect with. So go with your heart on this purchase if you're buying a bike in this category and get the one that speaks to you the most. All right, so briefly, what are the pros and cons to the F900R? We've talked through a lot of this, so I'll kind of gloss over this a little bit. The pros for me, the overall refinement I think is really, really good. The build quality is great. I really like all the available features that specifically this bike has with the premium package, things like an adaptive headlight, the heated grips, the cruise control, the riding modes, the Corning ABS, the big TFT dash. These are things that you may not get standard on a lot of those bikes and aren't even available on some of those other bikes I mentioned in terms of the competition. So I really like that you can get that on a naked bike. Another pro to this bike, I think, is the engine. I'm really a fan of this engine. I'm not a huge fan of the engine, which was kind of surprising because I don't love the engine in the F850 GS. It feels a bit uninspiring, a bit down on power, but this feels really athletic and really fun, and I really like the way it sounds. It also doesn't have too much vibration, so I'm a fan of this engine, and they've actually been proven to be pretty reliable for BMW. Another pro to this bike, and we kind of talked about this, BMW dealers tend to be really good, at least where I live. You have really good financing options and you have a really good warranty. So those are the pros. What are the cons? I think the main con to this bike is that, you know, it's a bit down on power, just a little bit down on power compared to some of its direct competitors, and it's a little bit heavier in terms of weight. So that power to weight ratio is not quite as good, and I think that's something you definitely have to keep in mind when you're shopping in this segment. Another potential con to this bike is that it does tend to get pretty pricey once you add the options that you want. So BMW's options are very tempting. I don't think there's going to be a lot of these bikes that you see that are out there for that $89,000-$99,000 base price. Most of them you see are going to be in that $12,000, $13,000 range like this bike is. Are you getting value for that money? I think you are, but that price is up there compared to some of the competition, and that's just the way it is. Final thoughts on BMW's F900R. I really appreciate what BMW has done here. Taking an existing engine, punching it out, and putting it in a sporty, naked, middleweight bike. This bike is relatively affordable, offers a lot of premium features, which sets it apart from its competition, and comes with BMW's typical quality of construction and good warranty and good dealer network. A lot of people shopping in this category go automatically to well-known and well-loved bikes like Yamaha's MT-09 or KTM's Duke 890. And those bikes are amazing. They offer a lot. But if you're looking for something possibly a little bit more refined, maybe a little bit more grown up, and you want some of the premium features and you like BMW as a brand, you really should definitely have the F900R on your shopping or on your comparison list. Thank you so much for hanging in there with me for this whole review. I hope you found it useful. If you have, please support Big Rock Moto, and there's ways to do that in the description below. If you have questions, comments, concerns, put that down below, and I'll be sure to get to those as soon as I can. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. Please ride safe, and I'll see you out there.